The Ninth Doctor new series adventures, I have finally gotten through them all. I have released reviews individually for all 6 of the Ninth Doctor new series adventures on my channel, so please do go check those out if you want more in-depth looks at these novels. But now that I've read them all of these books that released in and around series 1 of Doctor Who, The Revival, I'm going to now consolidate them on a tier list. I've given my individual ratings for them in the actual reviews, but here I will be looking at them comparatively and placing them kind of on a classic tier list and seeing where they should fit. So the first release was The Clockwise Man by Justin Richards. This was, of course, a 20s London escapade off to the British Empire exhibition, but then introduced to a kind of whole host of secret characters, clockwise men, perhaps clockwise cats, deposed leaders and all that kind of stuff, and was a quite interesting introduction to the Ninth Doctor and Rose in novel form. will definitely say that I enjoyed reading it. Lots of characters were introduced early on that made it quite, didn't really make me want to keep reading because I got quite lost. But it was quite interesting once you kind of got into it and those kind of extra characters disappeared. It was just that I didn't know who I was meant to focus on early on. But lots of characters were introduced early on, but the actual characters that we ended up sticking with, Ask, Repple, the woman, I can't remember her name, of the main kind of technically bad guy for the most part, is really, really interesting. The Painted Lady she's introduced as, which is quite, obscure. This book is definitely quite interesting. It doesn't blow me away, for sure. There were some interesting moments, like when the Doctor smashes someone's face into a glass tank, basically. Not even their face. They're a robot, so their mechanic face. But that's obviously was quite interesting. Rose doesn't do much except for kind of sleep and then swing around a cat on its tail and then smashes that as well. There's a lot of smashing mechanical beings, I suppose. The Doctor seems pretty generic, but definitely has the Ninth Doctor's temperament, so I would say it was still quite interesting to read. The Ninth Doctor, obviously, having been in the Time War, is quite an interesting Doctor to look at. But in general, with the kind of convoluted final set piece and Rose not really knowing what to do, like I mentioned, and characters that you don't really care about, like this kid called Freddy that Rose talks to, and then certain moments that is like, oh, I'm here to kill you now, and then it's fine, but it would definitely be in C for me. Up next was The Monsters Inside by Jacqueline Rayner. This was very interesting on the surface. It had a very, very interesting kind of introduction on this planet. This was Rose's first alien planet, which is kind of a big deal, but then they get separated, which again is quite interesting. This whole book is about them being separated into 2 prison planets, the Doctor in this scientific one, Rose in this kind of general population one, and then them kind of trying to figure out the Blatherine invasion that is going on these planets. But the separation lasts too long. The reunion is somewhat satisfying, but it doesn't last very long. And towards the end, it's in like chapter 17 or something that they actually finally get back together again. They introduced companions for each of the characters, but realistically, you could have just had kind of the Doctor and Rose, really. Or again, the Doctor didn't really necessarily need a companion, but you need to have someone for these characters to talk to. So it makes sense for them to have companions, but it just feels quite unnecessary. You end up having multiple different storylines that you're switching back and forth between, and it can get quite confusing. It was nice to see that this was mentioned on TV in Boomtown, but you don't get the same representations as well as the Clockwise Man. They kind of flipped a little bit. I'd say Rose feels a little bit more accurate to the Doctor in this one, but again, they're not perfect for sure. There's definitely some teething that could have gone on in the creation of these characters. which is fine. Like they were still interesting to read, but they could have kind of been anyone. The big bad Don Arco, the big kind of Colonel Curtsy Blatherine, was definitely the most interesting character in the book, but again, he's not in it massively. And like I said, the kind of supplementary characters are really, really uninteresting. But as a whole, you know, the atmosphere look much like the Clockwise Man. These two are pretty similar. The atmosphere is quite good. The kind of the Slitheen and the Blatherine are quite interesting. Like I said, Don Arco, the big bad, is quite interesting. And as much as I don't understand the science behind it, the kind of motives do kind of line up, and it does make it somewhat satisfying to an extent. But because of that, I will just be putting the monsters inside also at C. Winner Takes All is actually the one by Jacqueline Rayner. The other one is by Stephen Cole. And this one is very, very interesting. Very, very dark, but very, very interesting. But it kind of falls flat because of that. It's very fast-paced at the beginning. The Doctor figures out what's going on pretty early on, and it makes a lot of the later stuff pretty unsatisfying and predictable. In stark comparison to a later novel, Seal of the Dreams, this is very, very fast-paced. Mickey and Jackie are nice additions, but they're not really used to their full potential. Jackie ends up in hospital pretty early on, well, I'll say about halfway through, and then Mickey is, of course, just put in service of the Doctor and Rose. The premise of kidnapping humans and making them kind of forced to be controlled in this video game against the Mantodians in this pyramid or whatever is very dark, very interesting, but unsatisfying and predictable. Like I said, there's a character called Robert who's quite interesting, who is not explicitly mentioned to be neurodivergent, but clearly kind of is. And he makes a very interesting character for this kind of moral story. And it doesn't have a great atmosphere, unlike the Clockwise Man and the Monsters Inside. Obviously, this is a present day story. It doesn't have that kind of familial atmosphere that you kind of hope to expect from these ones. But it's still a pretty interesting plot in general. It just, like I said, becomes predictable. It doesn't really use the ideas to its full potential. And so for that reason, the Winner Takes All will be joining the other two first three novels in C. First of the last half, the first of the next three releases that were after Series 1 was The Deviant Strain by Justin Richards. The Deviant Strain was really, really interesting to read. It has a very slow burn kind of thrillery atmosphere in this kind of coastal Soviet base, and it was really, really interesting to read that. These kind of aliens trying to harness the power of humans. It was somewhat similar to Girl in the Fireplace in some aspects. But it completely fell apart in the climax, you know, very similar to Justin Richards' The Clockwise Man. The climax became too convoluted and the geography made no sense. The geography of The Clockwise Man was, climax was in Elizabeth Tower at the top with Big Ben, whereas this one was around an entire Soviet base, and it was really, really difficult to get your head around. I really, like I mentioned in my review, I really didn't want that to kind of make an impact as to how I like the rest of it. Because of how much I like the rest of it, I'm trying very hard not to think about how annoyed I was when I read the final climax of that book. But like that being said, the earlier moments of this novel are really interesting. There's characters that are really interesting. Jack is introduced here, and this is again one of the other major downfalls of this novel, is that Jack is not like Jack in the TV show whatsoever. His suave or con-man-y aspects are completely gone here. He's just forthright, bossy, and even like considerate to an un-Jacky extent. Un-Jack extent, I suppose. But yeah, it was really unsatisfying to see Jack here. He kind of trusts the Doctor already, despite This presumably following pretty closely from The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. But The Doctor and Rose in comparison are very accurate. You know, thankfully, they're a lot more accurate than these other 3 stories here. It's just Jack that kind of lets down the accuracy of these characters a little bit. Rose's ability to make her voice heard is really interesting. She gets a really individual, unique story with this woman who ends up being the kind of one of the spearheads of the movement to take over this human. It was quite convoluted towards the end and didn't make a lot of sense, but it was really, really satisfying. The slow burn with all these different kind of close-knit stories, but also very separate. Like Jack explores the inn and all of that, and Rose explores this kind of underground base, and the Doctor does whatever the Doctor does and the sciencey stuff. There's a really interesting use of Bad Wolf in here. There's a really, really interesting character called Alex in here, which I would definitely recommend The Deviant Strain. Maybe just don't read the end of it. But it was really, really interesting to read, and because of that, I'll be putting The Deviant Strain in B. Only Human. If you want a more detailed look at Only Human, I would definitely recommend my review on it, because there is a lot going on behind the scenes of Only Human, specifically to do with the author of this book, but we're looking more at the quality of this book. Jack, again, is more accurate, definitely, in this book, but he is thrown off to the side like nobody's business. You know, he ends up with the kind of D plot of this book, taking care of a Neanderthal in modern day Bromley, and it's interesting to read these little segments, but it doesn't mean anything whatsoever, and nothing comes of it. So it's quite sad, really. But the stuff that the Doctor and Rose do is quite good. Their rapport with each other is really good, especially with Jack. I mean, again, I'll mention with Jack, there's this moment where he strips down naked and runs through a hospital, which is very, very unfortunate. But, you know, the novel itself is still pretty satisfying to read. It's an interesting look at humans and their difficulty with feeling, basically. What would humans be like with no negative feelings? Obviously, that takes away what it means to be human. And Rose has these really nice, interesting looks at Neanderthals and early human beings, and the Doctor has this really nice insight into this character called Chantal and her experiments, and at some point Rose gets decapitated and stuff. It's very dark, again, like Winner Takes All. It's much darker than some of these other novels. I'd say that the easiest ones to read are probably The Clockwise Man and The Monsters Inside, and the other 4 are much darker, but this one and Winner Takes All are kind of take it a step further. Definitely wouldn't recommend those two to any kids, but Only Human, you know, did have interesting insight into it, for sure. It definitely kind of took a lot of leniency with explanations. You know, it was just like, they didn't really explain how and why some of the things happened in the novel. But, you know, you didn't necessarily get taken out of it by any means. But for all of those reasons, and I don't want to stick on Only Human too long because it is Only Human, but I will be sticking Only Human also in B. And finally, if you've seen my reviews, The Stealers of Dreams is a phenomenal novel. Not perfect by any means, you know, I'd say it's very difficult to get up there in the S spot, but The Stealers of Dreams is, on the surface, a quite generic 1984 dystopian novel, right? But it uses the Doctor Who lens to introduce some more sci-fi elements. So it's revealed in this novel, which, by the way, characterizes the Doctor, Jack and Rose very, very well. You know, it's probably the best out of all 6 of these. That's my main thing with all of these 6 novels, is their ability to characterize them, because 3 of them were written basically before Series 1 came out, and 3 of them were written kind of during Series 1, but before Jack was kind of introduced for the most part. So they're done very well. They've all got very satisfying stories. Rose goes fantasy crazy in this world that has outlawed fiction. The Doctor is trying to pinpoint, you know, why any of this is happening. There doesn't seem to be any kind of reason for a lot of this stuff, but it's very satisfying when you kind of end up figuring it out yourself. It is slightly predictable, but it's very satisfying being able to put all these things together. You know, the the planet is called different things by different people. You know, there's people who are in power, like positions of power, who end up also being fantasy crazy. That this policewoman who sees herself as being able to bring order to this planet ends up having faked the whole thing, right? So it is really, really interesting like that. And the Doctor ends up having to portray this kind of global figure that has been created through mass hallucination almost, and talk everyone out of it, and come to the conclusion that there's something in the atmosphere that is making these people realize their dreams, you know, not physically but mentally, right? So their dreams and their ambitions and their fantasies become real in their brain. They infect, like daydreaming almost, and the Rose ends up seeing zombies, and the Doctor and has this kind of sense of biggest sense of self. And it's really, really interesting to look at these things, you know. But like I said, it's not perfect, so because of that I will be putting it in A. So there you have it. That's my tier list. You know, nothing in here was particularly awful. I mean, all of these are just my opinions. You know, I've seen other listings and some people prefer different ones. Some people didn't like the Deviant Strain. You know, that's good. It's fine. Like, this is just my opinions, but the Stealers of Dreams is phenomenal. It's a very Doctor Who story, taking something that we know and kind of twisting it on its head. All of these characters end up kind of being their own enemies almost, and it's really, really interesting. I've said interesting quite a lot, I'm aware of that, but it is interesting. It's interesting to see that, again, interesting. The first three were kind of, for me, kind of all pretty insubstantial, but then the other three kind of got a little bit better. It's a shame that Only Human, you know, has the history that it does. And I think the Stealers of Dreams was definitely very close to being an S tier. It's just, you know, I think at the end of the day, the quality of the writing wasn't necessarily perfect. The story was very interesting, but there was, you know, just in terms of the standard of the writing, it wasn't necessarily like up there as like classic literature by any means. But yeah, I'm really, really satisfied with having read all of these. I'm really, really like motivated to keep going. I have already read The Stone Rose, and that one was really, really good. So it seems that, I mean, I was really glad to see the Stealers of Dreams and The Stone Rose be really good right next to each other. So hopefully in the future we'll have some good 10th Doctor novels. There's a lot of 10th Doctor novels, but hopefully I can get through them all. We'll see. You know, it takes a while to get these out. It takes a while for me to read the books and then edit the videos and make the videos and make my notes and stuff. So, but I think it was like August when I released the first one last year. So it's been over half a year and I've read like 6 books, which is pretty fast, but there's like, I don't know how many there are, 50, 60 something. Like there's a lot. It will take me years to get through them, but hopefully I'll have some of you along the way, and I would really be interested to see what order you would be putting these in. You know, I see a lot. I know that The Only Human is quite popular, and I think The Stealers of Dreams is also quite popular. But if you've got any interest in those other 3 that I've put in C, maybe give me some more insight into what I didn't see. Maybe, you know, like everyone's got valid opinions, and I really, really would love to hear what you guys think about all 6 of these 9th Doctor novels. It's a shame that there wasn't really any more, you know, that they could definitely do some more in retrospect. They've done a couple extra, like I think like 10th Doctor novels later down the line, you know, so it would be nice. I'm pretty sure, I guess, like the 9th Doctor showed up in one of the Time Lord Victorious books, and then also in like a Doomsday book with I think also one of the Slitheen, or one of the Slitheen from the Monsters Inside is one of that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, like I said, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on these. This is my personal tier list, but let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.